The gleaming halls of Galactic Medical Academy sparkled under the artificial sunlight. Jack adjusted his environment suit's settings as he walked through the main entrance, trying to get used to the lighter gravity. The massive station hung in space like a silver snowflake, its 6 wings spreading out from the central hub where he now stood. A small crowd of alien students had gathered near the reception, their various environmental suits marking them as beings from worlds very different from Earth. Jack noticed how they moved with careful, almost fragile grace. Some floated in protective bubbles, others walked on delicate legs that looked like they could snap in a strong breeze. "Welcome, human Jack." A tall, willowy figure approached him. Through the crystalline protection suit, Jack could see the being was made of something like living glass. "I am First Teacher Bright. We have made special arrangements for your robust physiology." Jack smiled, remembering the briefing about how his new classmates came from worlds with gravity as low as 0.2 Earth standard. To them, he was basically a walking tank. "Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to learning galactic medicine." Bright's crystalline form flickered with colors that Jack's translator interpreted as uncertainty. "Yes, well, we were surprised when Earth applied to our exchange program. Your species' medical practices are quite primitive, but the Council believes all perspectives have value." They walked toward the student quarters, passing through several pressure chambers. Jack watched as a cloud-like being floated past, its protective shell barely visible. Another student, who seemed to be made entirely of liquid, waved at them from inside a floating aquarium. "These are your classmates," Bright explained. "Miss is our gaseous friend, and Poole is our liquid state student. You'll also meet Stone, who comes from a crystalline species like myself." The first class was starting in an hour, and Jack found himself in a room designed to handle multiple environmental types. His classmates kept a noticeable distance, their environmental sensors probably warning them about his dense mass and high body temperature. "Is it true that humans deliberately break bones to fix them?" Poole's question came through the translator with a tone of horror. "You mean setting fractures?" "Yes, sometimes we need to realign bones to help them heal properly," Jack explained. The entire room rippled with shock. Mist condensed slightly in distress, while Stone's crystal surface developed several stress patterns. "But that's barbaric." Stone's colors shifted to what Jack's translator indicated was a mix of fear and fascination. "Surely there are gentler ways." "Different problems need different solutions," Jack said carefully. "Humans evolved on a high-gravity death world. Our medical techniques had to be practical." The other students huddled together, sharing glances through their various environmental suits. Jack sighed internally. He'd expected some culture shock, but this was going to be harder than he'd thought. Still, as he watched his classmates discuss emergency pressure treatments for gaseous beings, he knew he had a lot to learn too. First Teacher Bright called the class to order, their crystalline form glowing with professional authority. "Today we begin emergency response basics. Please remember, different species have different needs. What heals one might harm another." They paused, looking directly at Jack. "We must learn to work together, despite our differences." Jack nodded, taking his seat at the reinforced desk. Around him, his alien classmates settled into their various environmental chambers. He might be built like a tank compared to them, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. After all, sometimes healing required a steady hand and the strength to use it. The practical class began 3 days after Jack's arrival. The medical bay gleamed with advanced technology he had never seen before. Floating medical drones hummed quietly as they moved through the air, carrying delicate instruments designed for the most fragile species in the galaxy. First Teacher Bright stood at the front of the class, their crystalline form radiating what the translator suggested was professional pride. "Today, we will learn about emergency stabilization techniques. Please observe the standard method for treating pressure loss in gaseous beings." Jack watched as a drone demonstrated on a practice dummy that looked like a swirling cloud. The machine produced a gentle energy field that slowly contained the dispersing gases. The process took nearly 5 minutes. This is the safest way, Bright explained. Quick compression could cause trauma to the molecular bonds. Jack raised his hand. What if the patient is losing gas rapidly? 5 minutes seems too long in an emergency. The room went quiet. Poole's liquid form rippled with concern, while mist condensed slightly in what Jack had learned was their version of a frown. Faster methods exist, Bright admitted, but they risk cellular damage. Better to take time than cause harm. On Earth, we have a saying, Jack said carefully. Sometimes the cure hurts more than the disease, but it's better than dying. Stone's crystalline surface developed stress patterns, but surely gentle healing is always better. Not always, Jack replied. If someone is bleeding heavily, you have to apply hard pressure to stop it. If a bone is broken, you have to set it firmly. Sometimes being too gentle means losing the patient. The alien students shared looks of horror through their environmental suits. First Teacher Bright's colors shifted to a pattern Jack hadn't seen before. Perhaps, Bright said slowly, you could demonstrate your world's emergency techniques. For educational purposes. Jack walked to the front of the room. He picked up a medical dummy designed to simulate a solid-state being. On Earth, if someone's heart stops, we do this. He demonstrated chest compressions, carefully explaining the process. You physically impact the patient. Poole's voice wavered through the translator. With your hands. Yes. It keeps blood flowing until help arrives. But the force required. Mist swirled anxiously in their containment field. Humans are built to take it, Jack explained. Our bodies are dense, our bones strong. What would kill you might just bruise us. First Teacher Bright's colors had shifted to what seemed to be deep thought. Your species evolved requiring such intense medical care. We did. Our world is harsh. High gravity, extreme temperatures, lots of dangerous animals. Our medicine had to be tough too. The rest of the class watched in fascinated horror as Jack demonstrated more human first aid techniques. He could tell they were disturbed, but he also saw something else in their reactions, a growing understanding that different worlds demanded different solutions. As the class ended, Stone approached him. Your methods seem violent to us. They said, but I see their purpose now, though I hope never to need them. Jack smiled. That's what every medical student hopes. But it's better to know and not need, than need and not know. The alien students left the room still discussing what they'd learned, their horror now mixed with reluctant fascination. First Teacher Bright remained behind, their crystalline form flickering with complex colors. Perhaps, they said finally, we have something to learn from Deathworlders after all. The accident happened during a routine laboratory session. The class was studying cellular regeneration in different species when a power surge hit the station. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything seemed fine. Then the pressure regulator in Lab Chamber 3 failed. The blast wave hit without warning. Jack felt it as a gentle push, but for his classmates, it was devastating. Poole's containment field cracked, causing their liquid form to start dispersing. Mist's environmental suit failed, their gaseous body beginning to dissipate into the room's atmosphere. Stone took the worst hit, their crystalline form developing deep fractures from the sudden pressure change. The automated medical systems activated, but the power surge had damaged them. The emergency drones moved erratically, their gentle healing fields flickering uselessly. First Teacher Bright lay unconscious, their own crystal form showing stress patterns. Emergency protocols initiated, the station's AI announced calmly. Medical response team will arrive in 15 minutes. Jack looked at his injured classmates. Poole was losing cohesion fast, their liquid forms spreading dangerously thin. Mist had already lost 20% of their mass to the room's ventilation system. Stone's fractures were deepening, threatening to split them apart. The other students who weren't hurt huddled in the corner, their environmental suits maintaining their safety but leaving them helpless to assist. Their training covered only the gentlest of medical procedures. Nothing in their experience had prepared them for this level of trauma. "15 minutes is too long," Jack muttered. He looked around the lab, his mind racing through his emergency medical training. The tools here weren't made for human-style first aid, but he could improvise. "Everyone who can move, get to the safe zone," he ordered, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. The uninjured students quickly complied, recognizing the command tone in his voice. Jack grabbed a roll of thermal insulation material from a nearby storage unit. "Hold on, Poole," he said, quickly laying the material out. Using a piece of broken equipment, he created a depression in the center. Working quickly, he scooped Poole's dispersing liquid form into the makeshift container. "This will hurt," he warned, though he wasn't sure if Poole could still hear him. He activated his suit's temperature controls, using them to rapidly cool the insulation material. Poole's liquid form began to contract, becoming more stable as the temperature dropped. Next, he turned to Mist. The ventilation system was still pulling their gaseous form away, but Jack remembered something from his industrial safety training. He grabbed a portable magnetic field generator used for delicate crystal growth experiments and reversed its polarity. The magnetic field created a temporary containment zone, pulling Mist's dispersing form back together. Stone was the biggest challenge. Their fractures were spreading rapidly, threatening complete structural failure. On Earth, Jack had once taken a geology course where they studied crystal formation. He knew that controlled pressure could sometimes prevent crystals from shattering further. Using pieces of broken lab equipment, he created a quick pressure brace around Stone's largest fractures. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold them together until proper help arrived. The other students watched in shocked silence as Jack moved from one patient to another, his movements quick and decisive. When the medical response team finally arrived, they found 3 stabilized patients and a human covered in various substances, still monitoring vital signs with improvised equipment. The team leader, a tall being with tentacles, stopped at the door, their environmental suits' sensors taking in the scene. How are they still alive?" they asked, looking at Jack's makeshift medical interventions. "Sometimes," Jack said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You have to be rough to be kind." The medical response team moved through the lab with professional efficiency, their advanced equipment humming as they worked. Jack stood back, his makeshift first aid tools scattered around him, watching as they began proper treatment of his injured classmates. The lead medic, who had introduced themselves as Swift, kept looking between their diagnostic readings and Jack's improvised treatments. Their tentacles moved, and what the translator indicated was a gesture of disbelief. "The pressure brace on the crystalline student," Swift said, examining Stone's injuries. "It's crude, but it prevented catastrophic fracturing." "How did you know this would work?" Jack wiped his hands on his environment suit. "On Earth, we study how crystals respond to pressure. I guess their biology might work similarly." "You guessed." Another medic's color patterns shifted to show alarm. That could have shattered them completely. "They were already shattering," Jack replied firmly. "Sometimes you have to risk immediate pain to prevent worse damage." The medical team moved to Poole, who was still contained in Jack's improvised cooling chamber. Their liquid form had stabilized, maintaining cohesion much better than before. The medics carefully transferred them to a proper containment field. "The temperature reduction," Swift noted, checking readings. "It forced their molecular bonds to tighten. Painful, yes, but it prevented fatal dispersal. Unorthodox, but effective." Mist's gaseous form swirled stable now in the magnetic containment field Jack had rigged. The medics carefully adjusted their equipment to match the field's frequency before transferring them to a proper medical container. "Your emergency methods," Swift said, their tentacles moving in a pattern Jack hadn't seen before. "They all caused some degree of pain or discomfort to the patients." "Yes," Jack admitted, "but they're alive to feel that discomfort. Where I come from, emergency medicine isn't about avoiding pain. It's about preventing death." First Teacher Bright, who had regained consciousness and was being treated nearby, spoke up. Their crystal form still showed stress patterns, but their voice was clear. "In all my cycles of teaching, I've never seen anything like this. We call humans Deathworlders, but perhaps we should call you life preservers instead." The other students who had watched from the safe zone began to move closer. Their environmental suits' sensors still registered Jack as a dangerous presence, but they seemed less afraid now. "Teach us," one of them said suddenly. "Teach us your emergency methods, not to replace our techniques, but to add to them." Jack looked at the medical team, who were still working but clearly listening. Swift's tentacles moved in what the translator suggested was thoughtful consideration. "Perhaps," Swift said, "we should consider adding some Deathworlder techniques to our emergency response protocols. Sometimes, as our human colleague has shown, a firm hand is needed to preserve life." The room fell quiet except for the hum of medical equipment. Jack looked at his injured classmates, now stable and receiving proper treatment. He thought about the difference between his world and theirs, how what seemed brutal to them was necessary survival to him. "I'll teach you," he said finally. "But first, you need to understand something. Sometimes the greatest kindness looks like cruelty at first glance." 3 days after the accident, the medical bay was filled with an unusual sight. Pool floated in their containment field, their liquid form showing strong cohesion patterns. Stone's fractures had healed remarkably well, leaving only faint stress lines that would fade with time. Mist had regained all their lost mass, their gaseous form stable and clear. The recovery rate had surprised everyone except Jack. He sat with his classmates, explaining Earth's medical history as they recovered. "Our bodies are built to heal quickly," he said. "We had to be, given our world. So we learned to help that process along, even if it meant some pain at first." "The cooling technique you used," Poole said, their liquid form rippling with curiosity. "It hurt, but it kept me together." How did humans discover such methods? Trial and error, mostly. Centuries of dealing with injuries on a world that was always trying to kill us. We learned that sometimes you have to work with pain, not against it. Stone shifted slightly in their support cradle. "When you braced my fractures, I felt pressure I thought would shatter me. But instead, it held me together. It's fascinating how what we fear can sometimes save us." First Teacher Bright entered the room, their crystal form now clear of stress patterns. The accident had changed something in their teaching style. They carried a data pad showing human medical techniques. "The Academy Board has reviewed the incident," they announced. They were particularly interested in the survival rate. "In similar accidents without immediate medical response, we typically lose at least one patient." The room went quiet. Jack hadn't known that. He looked at his classmates, trying to imagine losing any of them. "As a result," Bright continued, "they have approved a new emergency response course. Human emergency medical techniques will be taught alongside our traditional methods." Mist swirled excitedly in their new containment field. "Will Jack be teaching us?" "If he's willing." Bright's colors shifted to what Jack now recognized as hope. "We've learned that different perspectives have real value. Sometimes, what looks like brutality to one species is salvation to another." Jack looked around the medical bay. His classmates no longer kept their distance. Instead, they moved closer, their environmental suits still registering him as dangerous, but their attitudes showing trust rather than fear. "I'll teach you," he said, "but you'll have to be brave. These techniques aren't gentle." "We understand now," Poole replied. "Life isn't always gentle either." First Teacher Bright's colors shifted to a pattern of pride. Perhaps this is what the Galactic Medical Academy needed. A reminder that healing comes in many forms, and sometimes the strongest hands can be the most healing. The recovery room filled with the soft hum of medical equipment and the quiet sounds of different species breathing in their various ways. Something had changed in these halls. The fear of Deathworlders was being replaced by something new: respect for their strength and gratitude for their knowledge. The new emergency response course started 2 weeks after the accident. The training hall had been modified to accommodate both traditional galactic medicine and human first aid techniques. Jack stood at the front of the room, facing a class that now included students from 3 different sections of the academy. Today, we're going to learn about pressure points and physical support, Jack explained, standing next to a multi-species anatomical display. Every species has areas where quick pressure can help or harm. Understanding these points is crucial for emergency care. The students watched intently as Jack demonstrated on different medical dummies. Even first teacher Bright participated, their crystal form glowing with interest as they learned how careful force could prevent further damage in crystalline beings. Notice how the pressure is firm but controlled, Jack explained, showing how to brace a fractured crystal structure. Too gentle, and you don't help. Too hard, and you cause damage. The key is finding the right balance. Poole, now fully recovered, demonstrated liquid containment techniques they had developed based on Jack's emergency methods. They had discovered that their species could actually form temporary barriers within their liquid structure, much like human blood clotting. Our bodies are more adaptable than we thought, Poole explained to the class. We just never tried because we feared the discomfort. Mist had made similar discoveries about gaseous beings. They showed how controlled magnetic fields could help their kind maintain form during emergencies, a technique that had already saved 2 lives in an accident on another station. Stone, their stress lines now completely healed, helped teach crystal species about emergency bracing. We always feared pressure, they said. Now we understand it can be our ally in healing. The Academy's medical database grew rapidly as human techniques were adapted for different species. What started as emergency measures evolved into a new branch of galactic medicine. They called it adaptive emergency response, a blend of traditional gentle healing and human-inspired rapid intervention. First teacher Bright watched their students practice, their colors showing deep satisfaction. When you first arrived, they said to Jack, "We thought we were doing you a favor by teaching you advanced medicine. Instead, you've taught us that true healing isn't about avoiding discomfort. It's about doing what's necessary to preserve life." Jack helped adjust a student's grip on a pressure brace. On Earth, we have emergency responders who run into danger to save others. We call them heroes not because they're gentle, but because they're willing to do difficult things to help others survive. The class continued, filled with the sounds of different species, learning to help each other in new ways. Gentle beings learn to be firm when needed, while still maintaining their natural compassion. They were creating something new, a medical practice that combined the best of all worlds. 6 months after the accident, the Galactic Medical Academy's main hall was packed with beings from across the galaxy. The first multi-species emergency response summit had drawn medical professionals from 50 different worlds. At the center of it all stood Jack, now wearing the formal insignia of a teaching assistant. The success of our new program has exceeded all expectations, First Teacher Bright announced to the assembled crowd. Her crystal form glowed with pride as they displayed statistics on the main screen. Emergency survival rates have increased by 40% across all participating stations. The evidence was clear. Stations that had adopted the new emergency protocols reported better outcomes in crisis situations. What had started as one human's primitive techniques had evolved into a comprehensive system of emergency care that worked for all species. 3 new human students stood near the entrance, their environment suits marking them as recent arrivals. Unlike Jack's first day, they were greeted with excitement rather than fear. Stone, now a junior instructor, approached them with confident movements that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. "Welcome to the Academy," Stone said, their crystal form stable and strong. "You'll find things a bit different from what you might expect. We've learned a lot from your kind." Poole and Mist, both working as emergency response trainers, demonstrated the new techniques they had developed. Poole showed how liquid beings could now form emergency barriers to help contain injured members of their species. Mist demonstrated advanced magnetic field manipulation that had saved dozens of gaseous beings in crisis situations. The most important lesson wasn't about specific techniques, Jack said, addressing the crowd. It was about understanding that different evolutionary paths create different needs. What seems harsh to one species might be necessary survival for another. The medical bay where the accident had happened had been converted into a special training facility. Here, students from all species learned both gentle and firm approaches to healing. The room no longer separated students by their natural abilities, but brought them together to learn from each other's strengths. "We call humans Deathworlders," First Teacher Bright said, concluding the summit. "But perhaps a better term would be life preservers. They remind us that sometimes the strongest hands can be the gentlest, and sometimes the gentlest beings must learn to be strong." As the summit ended, Jack watched the new human students begin their orientation. They looked nervous, just as he had been, but the welcome they received was very different. The fear of Deathworlders had been replaced by respect for their unique abilities. "Ready for the next term?" Poole asked, floating near Jack in their containment field. Jack nodded, looking at the diverse group of beings who had become not just his students but his friends. "Ready. We've got a lot more to learn from each other." The station's artificial sun began its evening cycle, casting warm light through the transparent walls. In the medical bay, students of all species practiced their skills, their differences no longer dividing them, but making them stronger together. The age of truly universal medicine had begun.